is Jody. I'm the president of the organization, in case you're new to our group. We would normally have a Christmas party. However, this is what we get for this year. So starting off, I want to offer my congratulations to Linda Ducalo. Her name was drawn out of the hat for the $50 check for new member referrals. And when I was looking over the list, between she and Gary, her husband, we have welcomed 3 new members to BROA between the 2 of them. So congratulations on that check. If you have not received it yet, it should be in the mail and receiving that any day.
Yep. We got it yesterday.
You got it yesterday. Okay, good. And so just kind of go through the board members. Some of them are here, not all of them. Like I said, I'm president, and I have agreed to continue to serve for another year. Steve Goheen is my vice president and my right-hand man. He has been invaluable. When I say, we got to show up and sign checks, Steve. Okay, tell me when and where. And so he has been just fabulous. He's helped me with seminars in the past. And of course, he helps Gary redo so many of our forms, keeps up on that. Our treasurer, Nate Higgins, is not here today, but he's been very helpful in trying to put together a preliminary budget for next year, as well as keeping track of our financials each month. Looking for discrepancies there. And then Secretary John Hanson, his term has expired and he wants to head for the hills. So, but as any good secretary, he keeps he's charged with documenting all of our business to ensure transparency and historical record of everything that we discuss and do. And then we've got our directors. Bob Hoffman, again, he's leaving us. His term has expired. Directors serve for 3 years. And he put together our Christmas party last year, did a fabulous job. He tried to get it off the ground this year, but it just wasn't a go. Gary, you guys all know Gary, former president. He does our newsletter, spends about 20 to 30 hours each month combing over different articles and formatting the newsletter. He maintains our website. Just his experience and knowledge is so valuable to our organization. And he has agreed to serve for 3 more years. Paul, he's got 1 more year. He's our IT guy. In fact, he's our moderator for this evening. And he keeps Facebook relevant articles up there that are useful, as well as he's the one who's all the MailChimp emails that go out to our membership to keep you guys informed. Then Donna, she's got 1 more year, former president. She's also our WLA delegate. So she attends the board meetings for WLA and reports back to us. And boy, that is such a valuable position. She also helps audit our financial records, things like that. Lona Hammer is not joining us tonight, but she's got 1 more year. She works for, of course, Kennewick Housing Authority, and she brings to our board a little bit different perspective, more from the tenant side. And that's just an entirely different perspective, and it's very valuable so that we have a good idea of both sides of the issue and we don't get in our own little bubble. So I value her opinion and her input. I don't know if Brian Flippo and Darwin Walter have joined us tonight, but they each have 2 more years. There are new members along with Kevin Glenn to our board. Getting to know Brian and Darwin and what their skills and everything are, but I hope to put them to better use, utilizing their talents in the coming year. Of course, Kevin Glenn, many of you know. He is sometimes our Zoom moderator, and his input and what he does for the board, because he's in property management and things like that, he just has so many contacts and knowledge that he can bring. Leasing scenarios, he's just a font of information, and a valuable asset to our board. He also has 2 more years to serve. So, like I said, our secretary is leaving, our treasurer is leaving, so we have new candidates for those positions. Are there any other nominations from any of you at this time for either of those positions? Okay, with that, I'm going to assume that there aren't. And so, Gary, do you want to go ahead and introduce our candidates?
Yeah, Deborah Bermudez. So they purchased their first property about 10 years ago, a fixer-upper in East Pasco. They needed a lot of help in improving the property. Came to our borough members, and she said they couldn't have done it without the guidance of our borough members. So she and her husband are also owner-operators of the Merry Maids since 2008. So they keep very busy with that. She works in the office managing their apartments while he does the day-to-day operation of the Merry Maids. They have 2 mostly grown children. And that's about it on her.
Okay.
Gary Schmidt has been nominated for treasurer, and Gary and Donna Schmidt have rental property locally, as well as a lot of them over in Hoquiam. I think they have 1 or 2 in Spokane. Is that right, Donna? She probably can't hear me. But Gary's been very active in Broa for years and years and years. He has served as treasurer many times. He's been director for many years. He is one of the wise voices on our board, and he led and participated in the annual audit of our treasurers and the finances for many years. He also serves as one of the 2 representatives to the WLA board, along with Donna. So he's just been an extremely valuable member. We welcome him back to the board.
Thank you. All right. So we currently have 26 members here. It looks like Deborah just joined us. So do you want to unmute yourself, Deborah, if you're able? I don't know if you're able to. So what we're going to do, because we just have a single candidate for each position, what I'm going to do, we can simply vote by acclamation, which is I'll ask for yay or nay. You can register your vote in the chat box if you would, please, and then we'll proceed from there. So at this time, do I have a motion to approve the new officers?
So move.
Okay.
Seconded.
Did you get that, John?
Yes,
Steve?
Gary moved.
Okay. And do I have a second?
Second.
Okay.
Thank you, Steve.
So all in favor of approving Deborah Bermudez for secretary and Gary Schmidt for the position of treasurer, please register in the chat box down there your vote for aye or yes, yay, approve. Okay. Any opposed? So looks like we have a majority of yays, and I didn't register any nays. So motion is carried to approve Deborah as secretary and Gary as treasurer. Welcome to our board. With that, we're going to have Debbie Rugsager. As in the past, she's going to install the new officers and swear in our 2021 board. So with that, Debbie.
Well, I pulled out my notes from last year. Last year, my opening comment was 2019 was a brutal year for Washington state landlords. We can all agree that 2019 was nothing compared to 2020. So it is important we keep our association strong to serve in protecting and bettering the rental housing industry in our area and throughout the state. Serving on the board is a great experience and opportunity, and you will all learn from your experience. Being a rental provider, housing provider is more than just putting a for rent sign in the yard. And serving on the board gives you a lot more than a network of landlords. It exposes you to the process. So newly elected are directors. Yeah, some are actually everybody that's newly elected isn't really newly elected because they've been on the board before. Gary Ducalo, Paul Cardelli, Donna Schmidt, Lona Hammer, Brian Flippo, Kevin Glenn, and Darwin Walter. You will be looked to for leadership in expressing ideas at board of directors meetings and carrying out assignments entrusted to you. Your leadership will be needed whenever management decisions are necessary. To the officers nominated for treasurer, Gary Schmidt. Gary, this is a position you know well. You are entrusted with the job of safeguarding the finances of this organization, and with your efforts, we can remain financially healthy. Our new secretary, Deborah Bermudez. Minutes are important to the organization, and we will depend on you in recording the history so it will be easy to follow and to maintain for future reference. Vice President Steve Goheen. The president will depend on you to be standing by to serve in her absence and to perform her duties and any others that may be assigned to you as next in command. President Jody, and I'll never say your name right, but I don't feel bad because nobody says mine right either.
Right. Gilbo.
Gilbo. Upon your shoulder rests the highest honor and greatest responsibility. We look to you to provide leadership and guidance and to carry out responsibilities and duties in accordance with the policy and bylaws of our organization. Would you each raise your right hand and respond to this question with, I do? Do you agree to assume the responsibilities of your office in leading the Benton Franklin Rental Owners Association in the year 2021? Please say or nod your head, I do.
I do.
I do.
I now declare these officers and directors duly installed.
Thank you, Deborah.
You're
Welcome
welcome.
board. I look forward to serving with each and every one of you. For those of you who have been on there for the last year, it has been my pleasure to serve with each of you. So, okay, so with that, Chester, our lobbyist and an attorney, Chester Baldwin, I'm going to hand it over to you to give us a synopsis of what we have faced and are looking forward to.
Wonderful. And Jody, about how long would you like me to go on that, just so I don't bore everyone to tears?
You go as long as you think that you've covered the information, and then we'll open it up for questions and you can respond accordingly. So
that sounds perfect. Okay. Well, thank you guys for having me. I always love, I usually get to come out to visit you in person, and it's usually one of my favorite times of the year, but that's not possible during COVID. We all get to be locked in our houses instead. So I'm in my garage right now. I'm not sure where you are, but this is where I Zoom from most of the day because my daughter has school Zoom inside. My wife has her Zoom. I'm only grateful that we don't have school-aged children. Our daughter's in a community college here. So to anyone who has like middle school kids, my hat is off to you, and you are saints, because I don't know how you be teacher, parent, and work and do those things, because they don't have any idea at the legislature how they're going to get this over either. I think they're all just hoping that the vaccine or something is going to fix this, because with schools kind of haphazardly doing different things in different places, there's not a lot of leadership on that. And I know school's not our topic here, but it sort of feeds into where we're going, because in housing, as we all know, we have the governor's proclamation that has prohibited us as the only industry that I know of, other than utilities, in the state that has to give away their product for free because of coronavirus. We are literally not allowed to, and we're the only state in the country as well, by the way, that doesn't at least require a nexus to COVID before somebody is not required to pay rent under a proclamation. We're the only state. We pointed that out to the governor. We've tried to work with them. We were part of a work group with the governor on these issues. There was no progress made in that. And so one of the things that I think a lot of you know about it, there's a couple of lawsuits that we've been part of. And the Washington Landlord Association is actually the plaintiff in one of those lawsuits that was filed against Governor Inslee 2 weeks ago in Lewis County, as a matter of fact. So not to get us too far off track, but there's two lawsuits right now. One in federal district court in Spokane against Governor Inslee, arguing that he's interfering with contracts. He doesn't have the authority based on due process arguments and takings arguments. And so we have a lawsuit that's been filed over in Spokane in federal court. We also have a state lawsuit that's been filed in Lewis County, just about a half hour south of Olympia, on the whether or not the governor has the authority to suspend statutes for more than 30 days without coming back to the legislature. Because the way our attorneys read that law, and most of the people I speak with, he can, in a state of emergency, take pretty extraordinary measures like he has taken, but he can only do that for 30 days. And then he must come back to the legislature, or at least what's called the four corners. And that's the House and Senate Democrat and Republican leaders, and get them all to agree on something. And then he can continue it longer than that. He hasn't even tried to do that in these proclamations that involve, rent control, lack of eviction, no ability to deal with problematic behavior from tenants because we can't give any kind of notices. It's been a pretty big problem for us. So those legal actions, we went through all the other channels and we finally got to that point. But in addition to that, we have a legislative session that's just getting ready to start. So January 11th, I believe this year, is the first day of session. And it'll go 105 days because this is the long session because we've got a budget to do this year. And as you can imagine, with COVID and all that's happened, that budget's going to be a little bit of a challenge. And on top of that, you've got all that's happened with what we were just talking about with the governor's proclamation. And there are some lawmakers who want to put that into perpetuity in a statute. And so they would like to see all of these things that are done under emergency powers as, a 2 or 3 year ramp to let everyone kind of work out of COVID. And we aren't okay with that in any way. Their bill also would say that you could never evict someone for not paying the rent that was due from March when the proclamation started through whenever the emergency is. So even if they never paid you a dime of that rent, you couldn't do anything. You could never evict them based on that. That's in the bill as well. A bunch of other things. It's just, there's a whole bunch of things in that draft that we don't like, but we understand we're going to have to work on this year because lawmakers understand that this is one of the biggest issues we have. And even before coronavirus, if you remember, we already had a housing crisis and we were already short 300,000 units. So our point to lawmakers is two things. One, we need massive rental assistance. And that is the one thing that they can do to actually help in this situation, because due to the governor's order and some other things, a lot of people have been put out of work as non-essential. And those people, we do have a group of people who are choosing not to pay their rent, even though they're fully employed. Those people, there's an Olympia City Council member who wrote an open letter to the newspaper about how she was still employed, still had her income, but she was not going to pay rent out of solidarity with tenants. And that is just wrong. This is a partnership, and anybody who can pay rent should pay rent so that we can take care of those people who can't afford to pay rent. Because, the government should then, it's their responsibility, not ours. Our responsibility is to house people. We've done our responsibility. Now the government needs to step in, and on behalf of tenants who can't afford to pay all of their rent, they need to make that right. And I have some friends that work up in DC, and I have heard more and more rumblings the last week about a new package coming out of there, and it has $25 billion in rental assistance in it. So I'm not promising you that's coming yet, but it seems to be a bipartisan group in DC trying to pull that together. There's other things in that as well that I'm not as well versed on, but the $25 billion in rental assistance would bring, somewhere between 500 million and $1 billion to Washington State for rental assistance. And then the big job is going to be figuring out how to get that into the hands of housing providers on behalf of their tenants to take care of rent that was due. And so those are policies we're going to be working at the legislature this year. And, as we're all on Zoom today, I think you can all probably bet the legislature is going to be doing something just like this. So good news, bad news scenario. Let's talk bad news first. Bad news is with Zoom, it's a little bit more difficult to be effective with lawmakers in a public hearing, especially if it's something important like rent control, because if 300 people show up for that and they're all on a Zoom thing like this, lawmakers won't have any ability to hear from everybody, and the majority party gets to choose in those situations who gets to speak. And that's not always a good thing for us in being able to give our perspective on these things. But with that said, the good news is we're setting meetings with the Washington Landlords Association and the Washington Business Properties Association with a lot of different lawmakers and lawmakers in your area as well. And it will be easier this year for you to be more involved in those and hop on with us onto a Zoom just like this that we'll set up and get links out through Jody and others when we're working with lawmakers in your area, because you've got some really good ones. And we want to make sure we got our message out to everybody of how important it is that they support the housing industry and make sure that we can be here to continue to provide housing. There's a new study that says, because the other option is that the government gets into providing housing and provides all the housing. That's what some people in Olympia think is a solution. And, our Speaker of the House, who just finished serving, Speaker Emeritus Frank Chop, he had been Speaker for 26 years in Washington, and he does not believe in private housing. He lived in a tent in a parking lot space while he was going to the university, because that's how much he doesn't believe in private housing. But the reports all show the government can't build more than 3 to 5%, government and charities, that the private or the public sector, 3 to 5% of the solution. That's all they're ever going to be. And so it's going to be up to landlords like you folks to keep people housed and to stay in this market. And we're going to do everything we can in Olympia to make sure it doesn't get worse, and to make sure lawmakers understand exactly how hard it is for you already, and that we need to be thinking about questions in two ways. One, is this going to help have more housing and more housing providers? And two, is this going to make it so that we have more of a problem with housing or less of a problem? They all think we have a crisis. The question is, how do we fix it? And, part of it's going to be more housing too. In addition to, our part, which is keeping people housed and dealing with rental assistance and making sure that comes into the market to take care of those tenants who have not been able to pay their rent. We also need to figure out how to get more housing units. And one of the things that the things they're doing right now is causing is people to sell their units in masses. And those units many of them are not coming back to the rental market because the mortgage now does not support an affordable rent, or there's just so many people looking for single family homes as well that those things are just getting gobbled up by the market. And we're losing that housing from the rental housing stock, maybe forever, but for a long time, no matter what, just because how high the mortgages are on those pieces of property when they sell. So last thing, and then I'll let this be a little more interactive and we'll take some questions. Not last thing, I'm not done talking, I'm sure, but this is going to be an almost entirely virtual session for lawmakers. And when they have opportunities to hear from you, it changes their perspective and it makes them think about things in different ways, because you're real people who work in this industry and they can connect with you in ways that, is harder when they're hearing from us every day about things. So I would really encourage all of you to be involved this year, whether it's via Zoom or by sending an email or by making a phone call to your local person or whatever it is. We'll be reaching out to you over the course of this legislative session that, again, starts in January. We'll be reaching out to you and saying, hey, we need your help on this, or hey, we need you to let your lawmakers know what you think of this bill or this concept. And, we really appreciate, I can see so many folks on this call who've already been part of our fundraisers. We did about 40 fundraiser lunches this summer, and Donna and Gary were on so many of those. Deborah, I know, was on some of those as well. And I see some other faces that I know joined us on those, but that was a big time commitment. But what it did was it allowed us to start educating lawmakers early on what was happening to us and what's been going on. And that has helped them to get a little farther ahead in trying to take care of some of the solutions. So it's been really important, because the other side, and not the other side, but the tenant side of this is very easy to understand. It's easy for lawmakers to understand and want to do something to help when people have been put out of work, especially through no fault of their own by the things that have happened. But at the end of the day, they have to remember that we can't be left holding the bag. This needs to be a broad solution where the state takes care of these issues rather than putting that onto housing providers, because otherwise it will either force housing providers out of the market or it will drive up rents to a place where we can't support that. And that's, these are businesses, and you can't continue to lose money time after time after time and then stay in this kind of business. And we're seeing a lot of our small mom and pop landlords deciding that maybe now's the time to make a transition. So stay with us. We're going to get through this too, and things are going to get better. But that's a little bit about what's going on at the state level. I'd love to take some questions, and then we can talk some more about all the other things going on.
I think there's some there in the chat box. One is, while we can't evict due to unpaid rent, when the moratorium is lifted, will landlords be able to go after renters for unpaid rent?
Great question. So many of us believe that it would be completely unconstitutional for them to step into a contract between two private parties and waive rent. When they have delayed it, we already think, that's why we filed a lawsuit. We already think that's an impingement upon our rights. But we think it's pretty clear that if the government tries to waive their rent without compensating, that it's an unlawful taking from one private party, the housing provider, for the sake of a different private party, the tenant. And so with that said, there's already a bill draft that is out there that would do almost all of that. It would make it so you could never evict someone for any unpaid rent from March 1st through whenever this thing ends. When it ends and the emergency proclamation ended, they would have to pay rent starting then. But if they never decided to pay you 1 cent of the rent from that time period in the middle, this bill would make it so you could not evict them.
Do you see them trying to prevent this unpaid debt on credit reports and that kind of thing going forward, so that we can't use that in screening
It's
future
funny you would
applicants?
ask that because I actually represent the collection agencies as well in the state, the state association of collection agencies. And yes, we're seeing exactly that coming as well, where you can't credit report this debt and you can't collect it with a garnishment and those kinds of tools. And so it leaves you with no way to get paid. And it also leaves you with no real, you could file technically a civil lawsuit and go all the way through trying to collect it that way. But I think a lot of housing providers look and see the tenant that they have and they think, how is this person ever going to be able to pay $17,000? And I can spend more money with an attorney to get a judgment, but now I have a piece of paper that says I'm going to get no money because the person doesn't have any money. And so I think there's a lot of people weighing those options. And there was a second part to your question too, and I didn't answer that part.
Just that, yeah, they would prevent us from being able to use this information when we're screening, so that, oh yeah, okay, well, I don't want that person because they've got this debt out there, whether it's collectible or not, we can see that they were a non-payer. And so
the current bill draft also, it puts an order of limited dissemination, which is akin to sealing it. So it would seal that off so that you would not be able to see that as well. So that is another part of the bill that's out there right now.
Does that mean you wouldn't be able to see it necessarily on a credit report, but for example, somebody calls for resident or rental verification and you've got on your books that there's an outstanding debt, that you could not disclose that there was an outstanding debt still owed when somebody calls for a rental verification?
No, the nice thing is the bill does not say that. What the bill says is that you can't, it won't be searchable at a court. It can't be given out to screening agencies or anyone else. So even if you went down to the courthouse and tried to search for it, you wouldn't find it. But it does not make it, it doesn't have any prong that says you as the former housing provider can't disclose this information. It's not aimed at you. It's aimed at the dissemination of that information through the courts or through the reporting agencies.
Okay, but clarification, you said something about screening agencies. Like, for example, screening agency calls me asking me for rental verification on a resident for another property. I can't disclose to that screening agency that I have a outstanding debt for that resident on the books.
No, so the duty is actually not in your camp, it's on the screening agency's part. So they wouldn't be able to disclose it if they knew that there was an order of limited dissemination. But it doesn't prevent you from giving them factual information. But what it does is it limits the bulk dissemination of that data from the courts, and it puts, so what it used to be called was sealing. It used to be that like this would be like the sealing of a case at the court. But what happened was there was a problem with the court clerks with sealing these cases because then they disappeared in ways that people didn't understand. And so instead of sealing the case, they put what's called an order of limited dissemination in the court file that says this case can't be given out. And you can't give that case through the court system to screening agencies, and you can't give information about that case out through any of the bulk distributions of data that come from the judicial, I'm getting into the weeds, I'm sorry, but the judicial information system, which is what usually is used by screening agencies for their data to figure out what is what. So the block with where the order of limited dissemination comes in is with those people giving out that data, not with you responding to someone else.
So if a private landlord calls me and I answer that question and tell them that they have a debt owing on the book, I can do that. But if I answer it to a screening agency, the screening agency can't pass that information along. Is that what I'm understanding?
If the screening agent, so if there's two factors. So one, the screening agency couldn't pass that on if they got the information from you and if they already knew there was an order limiting the dissemination of that information. If they didn't know about the order because the file just doesn't exist at the court and they searched and didn't find it, and then they talked to you, they wouldn't have done anything to violate the law because they didn't know there was an order limiting that dissemination. I know it's a little technical and I'm sorry for that.
Well, the reason I'm asking that is because as we enter into this as a property manager, as a private landlord, whoever, if I got a feeling that somebody may still have an outstanding debt, so and my screening agency wasn't able to tell me, hey, they have an outstanding debt, but I could go directly to that private landlord, that apartment complex or property manager, whoever, and say, do they have any outstanding debts? They could tell me personally, just it couldn't come through the screening agency. So what it means is I'm going to have to go out and dig a little bit deeper than just taking it from my screening agency is what I'm understanding. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, I mean, that would be one way to work around that. The one problem is if the person knows that they had this bad rental history, they might just choose to leave that portion off of their rental history and not have that landlord even be one that you would contact.
But we're able to discover that based on their credit reports that they've had past residents
right.
and public records.
Yep.
So,
Absolutely. So if you go through that kind of, I'm sorry, John, go ahead.
related question, kind of on the opposite side. So if somebody has a good history of rental payments, then that can be stated on the screening report, correct?
Yes.
So
This
if
is
there's,
limited-
if there's,
Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, so if you're looking at a potential tenant and the screening company says, I don't have a history on them, you can kind of say, hey, maybe it's because it's good or bad. But if they have a good history, they're potentially a paying customer.
Right.
You have to read between the lines.
Now, gut feelings are not allowed. Okay, so another question. Any prediction about how long the moratorium will continue?
Great question. So the governor tomorrow, I believe, I'm going to answer it in a bifurcated way. I'll directly answer it first. The governor is going to extend this proclamation past December 31st. The question is when till. I think most of us believe that it'll eventually go into March, maybe even March 31st. Now, will he go all the way to March 31st now? Our governor is sort of a boil the frog slowly kind of guy. And so I think it's more tolerable to people, he believes, to do it 30 or 45 days at a time and then just keep coming back. So I can't promise you that I think the next proclamation goes from December 31st to March 31st, but I have a pretty strong feeling we're getting to March because both the King County order goes till March, and now the city of Seattle just in the last couple of days just extended theirs into March, I believe all the way out to March 31st. So the state's going to follow those cities' leads, in my opinion, especially to give them cover for what they've already chosen to do. Now, is that constitutional? Different question. Oh, and also, so
I
the
just
second part of
saw-
that. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Gary.
I just saw a little item in the news today that the bill that Congress is trying to get approved for rental assistance is also going to contain the provision for the moratorium to be extended to the end of February.
Ugh,
That'd be national.
gosh, I hadn't seen that, but I'm not surprised that they would try to put that in. There's already a question, and there's a question about whether the CDC has the authority to issue a federal order like they've done, and then there's a question about whether or not, and there's some courts actually that have decided that they're not going to follow the CDC order, not in Washington, but other places in the country, because of the fact that they don't believe that the CDC has the authority to issue an order like that. But Gary, was your question on that, or did I miss that?
No, that I just wanted to make that comment.
Okay.
Well, and on the national one, it's usually linked to federal backed loans too. So
Good point.
so that it's not as far reaching, and they also kind of tie a nexus to it versus our open-ended Washington state one, which doesn't have a nexus,
Right.
which is probably more unconstitutional than the moratoriums.
Yeah,
And
I think so.
because I don't think, I mean, it's so bad that we could probably, anybody who's involved in this could probably sue the state and win because they're basically taking property. I mean, even if you were going to take a property and build a road, you still have to pay that individual for the property you're taking away. In this instance, they're not. So,
Paul, you were making too much sense here. I don't know what to do with this.
Okay, are there any other questions for Mr. Baldwin? I have a question here that's more directed towards BROA. We're new to this. Does BROA have a list of questions that we can ask as potential landlords and a list of answers we can give for past tenants? The advice there is generally, I don't know that we have a list on our website. Gary, you could address that, but typically you want to ask and answer questions with yes and no. Try to avoid answers that bring your own opinion into it. So typically, did they pay rent? Were there any notices or lease violations? Were there complaints from other tenants? That kind of thing. If you want to email me directly, I can provide you kind of a list of what I have used when screening, but whatever you ask of one, you want to ask of all others in order to avoid the possibility of discriminating against anyone. So.
Hey, Jody, I'll chime in real quick. As a licensed property manager, I'll tell you, if you call, ask close-ended questions. Don't ask open-ended questions. Always ask questions going to be answered yes or no that are very black and white. They can be black. When people call up and go, what can you tell me about this resident? And don't be offended if we look at you and go, you ask the questions, we'll answer them. And you ask close-ended questions like Jody said. That's super important.
Okay, another question. Some money has been made available in Washington for rent assistance during COVID. Do you know what percentage of tenants or landlords this has actually helped? I do not. Do you, Mr. Baldwin, have an idea of how many tenants and landlords, particularly on the, I think it affects more landlords are affected on the west side than here.
I'll say this, and I'll be a little careful with what I say just because I know we're recorded, but I've been disappointed with the way that's happened. The state only allocated $110 million for rental assistance, period. And at the most of that got, at the beginning of that, the first 80% of the time, they made you have an AMI of 80% or below in order to qualify, and you had to give up some future rent and some other things in order to qualify. And so most of our landlords didn't even qualify and were not able to take advantage of that before the money was gone. And it was not a substantial amount of money, not for the problem that existed. And so, we are working with both the governor's office, the Department of Commerce, which is where that money comes through, and lawmakers to try to make a different path for that money for the next round of rental assistance, because we already have a tenant protection program that we worked on that exists in Department of Commerce and a landlord mitigation fund. And those are both paths where we could get money out into the hands of housing providers on behalf of their tenants and take care of some of these things in a way that gets the money out in the streets for people who actually are doing the service of providing housing.
My biggest complaint when I've looked at some of these applications is that they seem to all require that the tenant initiate the process. And for tenants right now, there's no incentive for them to pursue that, either for they don't think that they're going to qualify or they're just not motivated. But that either way leaves the landlords blowing in the wind.
Yeah. And that's the message when we talk to our lawmakers. And if you guys are talking to any of your local lawmakers, the message is we're part of a partnership in this, and you are leaving us dangling in the wind as the only ones holding the bag for this whole problem. And if this really is a societal priority, and this is something we believe in, providing housing for these people who are having this problem, we need to have a broad state solution that doesn't put it all in the backs of small housing providers.
Agreed. Any more questions? Okay, I don't see any more. So,
Chester, what do you know about capital gains?
I know lots of things, nothing I like very much, but there's going to be a capital gains tax proposal this year. They're going to push very hard to get that passed. We've seen that proposal as high as 9.9% on a state capital gains tax. I think it's more likely that they'll try to make that a moderate 5%. Also, totally unconstitutional as well. And if we did pass a state capital gains tax, we would be the only state in this country to have a state capital gains tax and not a state income tax. So if you don't think the capital gains is getting us towards income tax, let's have a conversation, because that's where the group that is pushing capital gains wants to get to. But in addition to that, so that one we are going to fight as a broad coalition, because if you've spent your career, and it applies to real estate, it applies to all of your rentals other than your personal residence. That's the only piece of real estate that's been exempted from those capital gains policies that we've seen in the past. And that means if you spent your career building your real estate portfolio to sell it for your retirement, they want to take 9.9% as state capital gains tax on top of all the rest of the money they take. After having, raised our real estate excise tax 2 years ago to the point where, depending on the price of the property, we have some of the highest real estate excise tax rates in the country. So, they view real estate as an ATM where they can just come to get more money. And it really does come out in the price of everything. And they wonder why they don't have affordable housing after they put taxes, regulation, and cost onto housing providers. It makes me crazy. But there are those who understand that, and those that we are still educating on that issue. But it's a big deal for us and something we want them to understand, because they all want affordable housing in their communities, and everyone wants to have places where everyone can live. Well, they're the problem in having housing. We see money in Washington leaving. It's going to Colorado, it's going to Texas, it's going to Idaho, it's going to I'm blanking on Arizona. Those states are getting investment money that's leaving Washington, because if you have a choice, why would you put it in Washington with what's going on right now, especially as far out on a limb as we are with the governor's order that doesn't even require somebody to pretend that they've been affected by coronavirus. They don't have to do anything. They don't even have to claim they were affected in order not to have to pay rent. They just have to choose not to pay rent. And we can't even give them a notice telling them what they owe or what situation is. And, I'll off my soapbox now, but it's our biggest issue this year, and we're going to be working on it every day during session.
okay. Well, thank you for that information. It is very sobering indeed. So you guys should have received your membership renewals. We need you to donate to our political action committee. That is what goes to support these legislators that support our industry. So please, I hate to ask you to dig deep for that, but it's the only way that we can afford to kind of fight some of this nonsense. So please do that. And then, as he mentioned, the lawsuit. So we do have a legal defense fund. You can donate directly through WLA online to that, just to the legal defense fund. or write a separate check and send it with your membership renewal into the Everstar office. It has to be on a separate check though. Otherwise it will be returned back to you. It's all how legally you deal with the money. Same with the political action committees. So separate checks, please. I got a couple more questions that came in here late. Can owners sell their properties with non-paying tenants occupying them?
Great question. So the only two exemptions to the proclamation are you can give a 60-day notice to terminate someone's tenancy if you are selling the property or if you are going to take possession of it and live in it personally. Those are the only two exceptions to the current governor's order. 60-day notices for each, and now they require either an affidavit or a declaration supporting those. But your question is, could you sell it with an unpaying tenant in there? The answer is yes, but it might affect the price of your sale because you're going to have to disclose some of that information in the financials usually of that deal, and somebody is less likely willing to pay large amounts for that unit if it comes with a tenant who's going to be a problem and they're going to have to deal with. Just a thought.
Yeah, unless they're gonna go and move into it themselves.
Right. Yes, exactly.
They still got to get rid of the non-paying tenant.
That's true.
So, all right. Any final questions or comments for the evening?
Well,
All
thank
right.
you. Thank you for letting me join you guys. And I'm always willing to come back and give an update, maybe halfway through session or somewhere in there. Debbie gets all those, and so do Donna and Gary, through WLA as well. But I like getting to actually see all your faces.
Yes,
and
it's
thank you
nice
guys
to put a
for coming
face
on.
to the name finally. So thank you for joining us. I'm so pleased that you shared that information with us. So you have a good evening, and to all of our BROA members, thank you and have a good evening.
Thanks, everybody. Merry Christmas.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you, and Merry